General Varus of the Xerpian Defense Forces stood over the primary tactical holotable, its crystalline surface glowing red with the sheer density of the enemy force massed just beyond the southern plains perimeter. The Xenox had not yet fired the first show, but their presence was a silent, crushing threat. Silas, give me the current strategic assessment. I want hard numbers, not estimates, Varus commanded, his voice tight with controlled urgency. The comms officer, Silas, a young male clearly struggling to maintain composure, quickly adjusted the projections. General, the Xenox have completed their deployment. Groundside, we detect 5 full regiments supported by heavy armor. That includes 50 cruiser-class gunwalkers, multi-ton fighting machines with full particle shielding, and 200 battle behemoths. Our best assessment of their troop count is approximately 10,000 individuals. Varus slowly absorbed the data, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. And our defensive capability? Our combined forces, defense militia and colonial security, total 1,200, General. We have 24 heavy armored vehicles, and our primary defense is fixed-emplacement plasma cannon arrays, which we know are incapable of penetrating gunwalker shielding past point-blank range. Silas paused, swallowing hard. In short, General, the Xenox outnumber us 10-1, and their technological might is superior to ours in virtually every metric. Varus slammed his 6-fingered hand onto the desk, though the gesture held more frustration than power. They are creatures of pure, unadulterated avarice. Varus spat, the polished floor reflecting his agitation. They have no legitimate claim here. We, the Xerpians, discovered and initiated the colonization of Kylar Prime. But as we began to cultivate the first viable regions, their fleet appeared. They are here because they are technologically superior, and they simply believe they are entitled to take it. They are a bully. The Xenox flagship, the Fist of Acquisition, broadcast a chilling, looping message from high orbit, the formal ultimatum. Xerpians, your window for peaceful evacuation expires at the next solar peak. Failure to vacate Kylar Prime will be met with terminal force. Withdraw your personnel or be ground into dust. Varus turned, ignoring the chilling broadcast. This is why I petitioned the High Council for immediate, decisive military aid. We needed a deterrent. We needed help capable of meeting the Xenox on equal footing. The general's gaze settled on Silas, his desperate hope clearly visible. Silas, the aid. Did the High Council transmit a deployment confirmation for the Vulcan Armada? Their history of decisive martial intervention is precisely what we need to meet the Xenox. Their shock troops, legends whose war record could terrify even Xenox. Silas lowered his gaze, fear giving way to profound disappointment. General Varus, the Council has responded. They approved the deployment of a peacekeeping mission to the disputed colony of Kylar Prime. They did not send the Vulcans, it's humans. What? The Council is sending humans? Varus's voice, usually a measured baritone, cracked with pure, furious incredulity. Silas, repeat your last transmission summary. Carefully. General, Silas reiterated, his voice trembling slightly. They have chosen the human delegation, citing their unparalleled success in de-escalation, and they declared that this force will be more than enough to resolve the Xenox incursion. Varus roared, frustration and fear erupting into noise. More than enough! They are the most successful diplomats in the galaxy, not soldiers. When was the last time they fought a war? We are staring at a Xenox army 10 times our size, bristling with advanced weapons. The Xenox will not listen to diplomacy. They will simply laugh and butcher the envoy. Varus stumbled back, gripping his command chair. He let loose a bitter, cynical sigh, aimed squarely at the distant council chambers. I understand now, he muttered, the rage gone, replaced by chilling clarity. We, a mid-tier species establishing a fledgling colony, hold no true strategic value to the Council. Their decision to send the humans is not based on competence. It is a cheap diplomatic formality. A gesture designed to look good on paper while costing the Alliance nothing. We are disposable. We will lose this world, all because the Council prioritized their image of peaceful cooperation over the reality of a brutal invasion. A standard cycle later, the human delegation arrived. Varus met them at the primary platform. It was exactly as he had feared, a single, sleek diplomatic cruiser, flanked by one relatively small troop transport. He felt the sickening confirmation of his worst fears as he watched the landing, which confirmed his suspicion that this was nothing more than a bureaucratic formality, a cheap, political gesture from the council. Leading them was Mark Cavell, the diplomat, composed, impeccably dressed in formal grey and blue, and radiating the serene calm of someone about to attend a cultural summit. Beside him was Captain Jack Mason, the military escort, broad-shouldered and relaxed in his battle suit, followed by a battalion of perhaps 100 human soldiers. They carried standard-issue rifles, moving with professional discipline, but Varus saw them only as security for the diplomats, nothing more. Varus forced a rigid, formal bow, his voice strained and heavy with unconcealed hopelessness. "Ambassador Cavell, Captain Mason," Varus began. "Welcome to Kylar Prime. I must be frank. We are facing 10,000 Xenox troops and 50 gunwalkers on the perimeter. The time for mediation is over. The Xenox are demanding surrender." He gestured dismissively toward the human contingent. "Ambassador, with all respect, I had hoped the Council would send power. Instead, they sent process. The Xenox will reject your terms, and then, as is protocol, you will leave. And when you leave, we are left alone to face the consequences." Mark Cavell smiled, a warm, genuine expression that did nothing to quell the General's profound despair. "General Varus, we are here precisely because the Council believes in the power of a final, serious diplomatic attempt," Cavell said smoothly. "We will be proceeding immediately to present the Xenox commander with a non-aggression mandate and a fair option for withdrawal." Jack Mason stepped forward, his eyes calm, and offered only a generalized assurance. "We are here to ensure the safety of the delegation and to secure a peaceful solution, General. That is our primary objective." Varus could only shake his head, utterly dissatisfied and feeling profoundly helpless. "Captain, the Xenox will treat this diplomatic visit as a joke. They will see it as weakness and exploit our momentary pause immediately." Mark Cavell placed a reassuring hand on Varus's arm. "General," he said softly, his voice dropping slightly, "you mistake our reputation for our capability. We spent millennia perfecting survival on a death world. We trust that by the end of this cycle, your anxieties will be alleviated." Varus could only stare, profoundly dissatisfied and certain that the humans had brought only diplomatic papers and polite words to a battle that required fire and steel. He truly believed he was watching his colony, being handed over to the Xenox on a silver platter as the humans calmly began their preparations for the diplomatic mission. General Varus was a creature of logic and military calculus, yet even he was susceptible to desperation. He had spent the last 2 cycles pacing the length of his command center's observation deck. His intellect told him that against Xenox avarice, human diplomacy had a precisely 0% chance of success. But deep within him, a final, flickering spark of self-preservation kept a ridiculous 0.01% hope alive. A hope that the famed human silver tongue could somehow conjure peace out of this catastrophe. When the human diplomatic cruiser finally reappeared on the tactical sensors, the Xenox formation on the plains remained static, waiting. Varus's heart sank, but he maintained position, outwardly impassive. Mark Cavell strode into the command center, his face still holding that baffling, pleasant serenity, though his formal clothes were now slightly dust-streaked from the rough landing. Captain Jack Mason was right behind him, his hands resting easily on his utility belt, moving with the same dispassionate calm with which they had left. "Report, Ambassador," Varus said, his voice clipped, expecting the worst. "General Varus, as you may have anticipated, the negotiations were unsuccessful," Cavell stated, pulling a chair closer and sitting down as if he were settling in for a pleasant tea after a long journey. "The Xenox commander, a brute named Krell, was unambiguous. He claims the Kylar Prime system by conquest, citing your inferior claim and technology as justification. He gave us until dawn to withdraw the entire Xerpian populace, or he would begin full frontal assault." Varus's primary sensory organ tightened. "Did he give any quarter for the Council's jurisdiction? Did you inform him that attacking a sanctioned diplomatic envoy is an offence warranting alliance intervention?" Mark Cavell chuckled, a soft, dry sound. "Oh, he was well aware. In fact, General, Krell enjoyed playing with the rules. He made several highly aggressive maneuvers, simulated charges, sonic bursts aimed directly at our transport, even a near miss with live rounds. He pushed every boundary without actually crossing the line into open war. At one point, Cavil said, leaning in with the detached air of a historian recounting a minor incident, I genuinely thought his honor guard was going to break formation and vaporize us right there in the tent. Varus felt a familiar, sickening fear. These creatures were monsters. But what truly startled Varus, what jolted him out of his terror, was the ambassador's absolute, unshakable demeanor throughout the ordeal. Cavil spoke of being nearly executed with the same casual air one might use to complain about a delayed star ferry. He was extremely rude, General, Cavil concluded, shaking his head slightly. Frankly, the most hostile party I've dealt with since a particularly bad session of the Human Intertribal Assembly back in '78. But I got his signature on the rejection mandate, so the paperwork is complete. Varus scoffed, a raw, bitter sound, his last vestiges of hope fully extinguished. He no longer saw a diplomat. He saw a tedious bureaucrat. I knew it, Varus declared openly, crossing his arms and regarding the humans with cold disdain. The Council is just completing a formality, and you humans, with your endless capacity for procedural documentation, are merely their pawns. You came here, failed exactly as predicted, and now you have the necessary signature to retreat and report our inevitable surrender. Congratulations, Ambassador. You've ensured the paperwork is complete while our colony dies. Mark Cavil remained utterly unfazed. He rose from his chair, a decisive, almost cheerful tone entering his voice, a tone Varus completely misread as diplomatic smugness. General Varus, you are correct, Cavil said, gathering his diplomatic materials. The submission of the rejection mandate was a necessary formality for us. The diplomatic avenue is now officially closed. The talking is finished, the paperwork is filed, and the Council's prerequisites have been met. He turned to Captain Jack Mason, his expression shifting from diplomatic serenity to cold, focused execution. My turn is over, Captain Mason. The table is now yours. Jack Mason simply gave a silent nod to his counterpart. He didn't issue any grand orders or motivational speeches. He simply activated a discreet comms channel. Viking 1 to all units. Phase 2 activation. Green light on the assembly sequence. Let's make this quick. Varus, still processing Cavil's casual admission of procedural compliance, watched, utterly confused, as the human soldiers, the 100-strong diplomatic escort he had entirely dismissed, began to move. They moved not toward their transport for evacuation, but to the separate cargo vessel that Varus had initially dismissed as a supply freighter carrying provisions. The soldiers began unloading equipment and, with surprising speed and precision, started assembling it on the forward, hastily erected sandbag line, the very line the Xenox were expected to breach. Varus used the optical zoom on his holotable to get a closer look. What he saw made his organic jaw drop in astonishment. The equipment was heavy, huge, clearly meant for fixed emplacement. It had none of the graceful curved lines and energy-focusing lenses of modern plasma cannons or particle accelerators. Instead, it was bulky, crude, and industrial. It was essentially a massive sphere mounted on a heavy articulated gun carriage. The barrel was thick, short, and stubby, looking far too wide for its length. The carriage itself was riveted steel, painted a dull, worn grey, and the whole device looked like it was powered by a heavy-duty combustion engine, complete with thick, exposed coolant pipes, technology that seemed decades, if not centuries, obsolete. Captain Mason! Varus rushed to the human officer's side, pointing a frantic finger at the screen display. What is this artifact? That artillery. It looks like something salvaged from a pre-FTL museum. Its design is primitive. The Xenox are deploying heavy gunwalkers and disruptor tanks. How are we going to defend against their might with that relic? Mason looked at the monitor, a subtle, cold smirk playing on his lips. That, General Varus, is called a Cassaba Howitzer, or more precisely a mobile version of it. It's not a relic, though it is certainly old. We found that the older the tech, sometimes the more unconventional the results. Varus blinked, reeling from the sudden, profound shift. His mind, still stubbornly stuck on the idea of diplomatic failure, struggled to catch up with the reality that the humans had a hidden military agenda. He was still unsure how even 100 men and a single antiquated gun could save them, but at least they weren't leaving. He tried desperately to pass the unfamiliar term, focusing on the weapon itself. A. Cassaba Howitzer? What is its purpose? What is its payload? Is it a kinetic penetrator, a high-yield chemical shell? Mason took a deep breath, the subtle smirk hardening into a look of surgical precision. In essence, General, the Cassaba Howitzer is a nuclear-shaped charge. It uses a small, contained fission fusion core to generate and direct an extremely powerful, high-velocity jet of plasma and X-rays. A long, heavy silence descended upon the command center. Varus felt his blood run cold as the implications of that statement resonated through his fear. A nuclear weapon? Varus stammered, stepping back. You brought a nuclear device to a peacekeeping operation? This is madness. The Council's sanctions against mass-destructive devices are absolute. It is illegal. Varus slumped, muttering under his breath in his native tongue. A string of curses aimed at the Council, the Xenox, and the seemingly insane species now guarding his colony. He was utterly convinced the humans had just committed a galaxy-spanning offense. Captain Mason turned back, his calm demeanor finally showing a flicker of intensity, as if he were correcting a child on basic physics. Relax, General. We are well aware of the Council's ordinances against indiscriminate nuclear detonation, Mason explained. This is precisely channeled and leaves no contamination. It focuses the blast to a single point. This is not a bomb. It's basically a gun, a highly directional, focused energy projector that happens to be powered by a nuclear reaction. We will not turn your newly found colony into a radioactive dead zone. There is no fallout, no residual cloud, no lingering mess. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until only Varus could hear, a cold, challenging glint in his eyes. And besides, General, it's not illegal if it's the first time. Varus, though still doubtful, felt a terrifying blend of relief and sheer horror. He looked at the device on the screen, a technological relic powered by cosmic violence, brought to a peacekeeping mission by diplomats, and could only silently curse. It's directional, Mason finished, his voice now crisp and commanding. You won't feel a breeze unless you're directly in the beam. Varus inhaled, forcing his vocal cords to formulate the obvious, agonizing question, and those in the beam. But as he looked up, the question died in his throat. Captain Mason wasn't looking at him, but at the main tactical screen, and his face held a slight, almost devilish smirk, a look of utter predatory satisfaction that was profoundly alien to the peaceful human image. Varus didn't need the answer spoken. He understood. There would be nothing left to feel anything. Captain Mason finally turned his eyes utterly flat and devoid of any shared emotion. Now, General, prepare your men. They're about to witness true deterrence. The dawn was approaching, and with it, the inevitable wave of Xenox armor. Varus could only stare at the archaic, silent weapon on the screen, his spirit wrestling between a desperate flicker of hope and paralyzing dread. The diplomacy had failed. Now, the humans were about to show the Xerpian what came before they learned to be peaceful. The Xenox army advanced with the inevitability of a tidal wave. General Varus watched the tactical monitors as the horizon filled with chrome-plated bulk. The Xenox were committed. The formation was terrifying. 2 rows of 5 massive cruiser-class gunwalkers, 10 titans stomping the dust-caked ground, followed by dozens of battle behemoths, light-armored vehicles, and thousands of infantry. Their advanced energy weapons were powered up and humming, ready for the slaughter. Xenox Commander Krell, confident of his overwhelming superiority, hailed the Xerpian frequency directly. The sound filled Varus's command center, a harsh, guttural voice layered with brutal digital arrogance. Xerpians, you have failed to evacuate the planet by my decreed deadline. Now suffer the consequences. And I see the Council's pet diplomats have decided to stay, even when their purpose is clearly nullified. Such idiot creatures. Your role is over. You should have packed up your diplomatic toys, minded your pathetic business, and gone home by now. Instead, you will be ground into the dust with your Xerpian dependents. Krell's voice then shifted, not in panic but in mock confusion, broadcasting his contempt across the entire battlefield frequency. What is that junk on the ground? Those humans have brought an antique pea shooter? Xenox army, be careful. That thing looks like it can clip your toenails. A huge roaring sound of synchronized, digitized laughter followed, filling the comms channel. Krell's voice dripped with contempt. You insult the Xenox by bringing such a puny force and such ancient trash for this matter. I will enjoy making an example of you all." Varus's heart hammered against his ribs, beating a frantic rhythm of dread. This was it. The Xenox numbers were overwhelming. Even though the single human weapon looked promising, Varus's military training screamed at him that it would not be enough against 20 heavy gunwalkers and thousands of troops. It was not General Varus, but Captain Jack Mason, who picked up the comms receiver and pressed the transmit button without a flicker of haste. "Commander Krell." Mason's voice was calm, almost conversational, yet it cut through the Xenox's static and fading laughter with chilling clarity. "Ambassador Cavil successfully endured your display of hostility and poor manners. He offered you a dignified exit. You refused. The terms of engagement have expired. I am Captain Mason, and I handle the rest." He paused, then delivered the final line with a quiet, lethal finality. "You came here looking for a war. What you are about to receive is a termination notice." The Xenox channel was silent for a tense beat. Then Commander Krell burst into roaring, digitized laughter again, laced with renewed confidence. "A termination notice? Oh, the human is rich. You guys really are silver-tongued artists," Krell sneered. "I will enjoy watching your insolence fade from your eyes personally. I see that cannon now. It belongs in a landfill. Forward! Show these insects the true meaning of conquest. Advance!" Before Krell could finish his sentence, Captain Mason gave the most terse and chilling order General Varus had ever heard. "Gunner, fire." There was no whine of energy charging, no warning siren, and no laser tracing a target. The Cassaba Howitzer, the one relic gun, fired. On the Xenox main frequency, Commander Krell's triumphant digitized laughter cut off abruptly, not fading, but instantly replaced by a deafening echoing static of pure shock. On the visual display, the results were instantaneous and incomprehensible. A column of light, impossibly bright and utterly silent, shot out from the short, stubby barrel. Where the directed X-ray and plasma jet struck the Xenox formation, reality seemed to simply vanish. The entire leading row of 5 cruiser-class gunwalkers, vehicles built to withstand orbital strikes, shielded against thermal and kinetic bombardment, ceased to exist. Their multi-ton frames, their advanced energy shielding, their crews, all were vaporized, not destroyed, but completely reduced to superheated gas in a fraction of a millisecond. The path of the beam continued, slicing through a dozen subsequent ranks of armored behemoths and the infantry marching between them. Walkers sagged into molten shapes before vaporizing, and soldiers caught in the line vanished so quickly their shadows burned into the ground. The effect was identical each time, a clean, silent line of absolute nothingness carved straight through the Xenox army. Dust and glowing particles drifted back into the newly formed glass-edged chasm in the earth. The overwhelming clamor of battle preparations died instantly, replaced by a deep, unnatural silence, as if the world itself was stunned. For a moment, there was a dread silence, an eerie, frozen pause, as if the Xenox army itself was unsure what had just happened. The front ranks stood motionless, staring at the glowing trench carved through their center. It was only when the dust settled, revealing the absence of walkers, crawlers, or even bodies, that realization struck. Pure, undeniable panic spread like wildfire in the Xenox formation. Chaos erupted through their formation. Those close enough to survive and unlucky enough to see their behemoths, gun crawlers, and fellow soldiers turned into vapor broke first. Veterans with decades of service hurled their weapons aside and sprinted in blind animal terror. Officers screamed contradictory orders, but their commands dissolved under the stampede as ranks shattered. Units in the midline, still processing the impossible sight, staggered backward in disbelief before panic seized them too. Soldiers tripped over each other, scrambling away from the shining, glassed trench as if it were a living creature. Some tore off armor plates, convinced the heat was still crawling up their suits. Others collapsed to their knees, trembling and incoherent. The Xenox formation, once a disciplined wall of steel, dissolved into a frantic swarm. An army not fighting, not regrouping, but fleeing from a weapon no doctrine had ever prepared them for. The Xerpian general Varus stood frozen, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the glassed scar cleaving the battlefield. In all his years of service, he had studied weapons, tactics, deterrence. Nothing in his doctrine had prepared him for violence delivered with such calm finality. His hands trembled in fear from the chilling display of human capability. He swallowed, voice barely steady. "Wait, did you say this was a portable version?" Jack Mason didn't answer. He only glanced back at the battlefield, then at the weapon, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The surviving Xenox forces were now in full disarray, attempting to organize a retreat back to their command base. Suddenly, Commander Krell's voice, no longer arrogant but now screaming, laced with a raw mixture of frustration, anger, and absolute panic, erupted over the general frequency. "Violation! This is a violation of the Great Nuclear Treaty!" Krell shrieked, his voice breaking through the digital static. "Human! You cannot use atomic fire! This is illegal! You will answer to the Council for this crime!" Captain Mason, watching the panicked rout on the tactical holotable, picked up the comms unit. His tone was dismissive, almost weary, yet profoundly sarcastic. "Commander Krell," Mason replied. "My apologies. We must have missed the memo where you appointed yourself the Galactic Advocate for Armament Treaties. Funny, a moment ago you seemed far less concerned about rules when you were deploying 50 gunwalkers to steal a colony. You were reveling in the idea of shattering every property right and sovereignty agreement to seize this colony by force." Mason's voice hardened, stripping away the sarcasm to leave only cold fact. "You forfeited the right to lecture anyone on legality the moment you brought an invasion fleet to a neutral world. And for the record, this is a directed energy weapon. No contamination, no fallout. We are abiding by the spirit of the law while teaching you about the reality of consequences." A guttural, enraged sound was all that Krell could muster in reply. "This is not over, human. You will regret this." Then the Xenox communication went dead, replaced by the frenzied scramble of ships and vehicles reversing course, attempting a disorganized retreat. Varys felt a wave of dizzying relief. The humans had done it. A single shot, a terrifying display of power, and the bully was running. "Captain Mason, they are falling back," Varys exclaimed, clapping his hands together, relief overriding all protocol. "The threat is neutralized. We are thankful to you." But Mason wasn't looking at him. He wasn't celebrating. He was watching his team of soldiers. And to Varys's utter bewilderment, the humans were busy setting up 3 more Cassaba Howitzers along the firing line. Covering all possible flanking positions, Varys's eyes widened. What are you doing?" "They are running, Captain. Why expand your line now?" Mason turned to Varys, his expression serious and devoid of any pride or superiority. "Because, General," he said, his voice flat with professional certainty, "we know war a little too well." Varys stiffened at the implication. He had commanded armies for decades. He had taught strategy at the Xerpian War Academy. He was no novice. He had faced battles and retreats before, but he had not expected a war tactics lesson from a species universally recognized as the galaxy's chief peacekeepers. Mason walked toward the main holotable, his voice taking on a hard, resonant quality, the voice of a man who spoke from brutal collective memory. "Before we became peacekeepers, General, we saw countless wars. We invented war. We lived and breathed it for millennia. That history taught us one absolute, undeniable truth about conflict, a truth that no treaty or technological marvel can ever erase." Mason gripped the edge of the holotable, his eyes locking onto Varys's with intense focus. "General, we studied the Xenox before we landed. We read every report, every battle, every massacre they engineered." He tapped the holotable, pulling up a wide-angle battle map. "But most importantly, we studied their behavior." He looked Varys dead in the eye. "They're not broken. They're buying time." Varys felt his stomach twist. Mason continued, tone sharpening like a blade. "Xenox don't accept defeat. They don't retreat out of fear. They retreat to reposition. They're wounded predators right now, confused, angry, and calculating the next angle." His fingers trailed across the projected terrain. "Flanks, ravines, blind spots, anywhere they think we fired our only shot, anywhere they believe your troops will hesitate." As if summoned by his words, the holotable flashed red, multiple signatures surging from the western ridge, Xenox reserves, fast, coordinated, reforming. Varys stared in disbelief. "How did you?" Mason didn't answer. He only gave him a thin, humorless smile, then a wink. "War has patterns, General. Humans learned them the hard way." He nodded toward the incoming flank. Rule 1, never trust the first punch. Rule 2, always be ready for the second. Captain Mason didn't wait for a response. He simply gave the order to his crew. Viking 1, synchronize all 4 targets. Fire at will. 4 columns of impossible, silent light erupted from the line. The concentrated fire was overwhelming. The Xenox counterattack, built on the assumption of a single slow-to-recharge weapon, was shattered instantaneously. Any structure, vehicle, or creature that presented itself as a target on the battlefield simply ceased to be. Number didn't matter. The roar of the Xenox offensive died, not with a bang, but with a horrifying, utter silence. What was left of the aggressors' columns didn't retreat hard. They simply fled in absolute terror, scrambling for orbit and away from the terrifying ancient power of the Deathworlders. No one cheered. Not the humans. Not even the Xerpians. Some victories were too absolute for celebration. They only left silence and the smell of metal cooling where armies once stood. General Varus stood on the reclaimed battlefield 2 days later. The acrid smell of ozone and superheated dust still hung heavy in the air. The Xenox were gone, their presence scrubbed from the system. What remained on the plains was a terrifying testament to human efficiency. 5 meticulously clean, surgically precise trenches where the enemy's most advanced armored vehicles had once stood. There was no widespread contamination, no lingering radiation. Just the stark, absolute obliteration of all targets in the beam's path by a weapon named Cassaba Howitzer, a title Varus knew was distressingly and typically humanly, named after a seemingly harmless fruit. He watched as Captain Jack Mason's small unit systematically disassembled the Casaba Howitzers, packing the massive, antique weapons away with the same quiet competence they had shown assembling them. Mark Cavell, the diplomat, walked up beside Varus. Cavell was pristine again, the dust from his earlier meeting gone. The Xenox commander, Krell, is already submitting his formal surrender and withdrawal through the Council's diplomatic channels, Cavell informed him. He cited unforeseen and unconventional tactical resistance as his reason for failure. A much cleaner solution than having to fight a protracted engagement. Varus nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the empty trenches. The sheer scale of the humans' power, coupled with their restraint, was staggering. Ambassador Cavell, Varus began, his voice rough with shame. When you arrived, I cursed the Council's decision. I saw the humans as naive peacemakers, good only for mediation. I was convinced you were only a formality, a political gesture before our inevitable collapse. Please accept my sincerest apology for underestimating your species. Cavell smiled gently, accepting the apology without arrogance. General, there is something you should know. It's a confession. The Council had approved your request for the Vulcan Armada. Varus blinked, astonishment written across his face. They were coming? Then why? We asked them to send us instead, Cavell interrupted, his voice dropping slightly. Primarily because a Vulcan operation, though effective, would have meant weeks of conventional warfare, significant planetary damage, and, critically, self-personnel loss. The Vulcans are conventional. The Xenox would have known how to fight them, costing Xerpian lives. Cavell then offered a small, unsettling smirk, a mirror of the professional malice Varus had seen on Mason's face moments before the first shot. And secondarily, Cavell continued, nodding toward the retreating Captain Mason, Captain Mason needed to battle-test the Cassaba Howitzer in a live, high-pressure environment. We needed empirical data to perfect the deployment protocols. Varus felt the blood drain from his face. They had chosen to use his planet, his crisis, as a testing ground for a horrific weapon, yet in doing so, they had saved every Xerpian life. He was terrified, but profoundly grateful. The Council didn't send a military force. Varus whispered, the realization dawning on him like the terrifying, silent light of the Casaba. They themselves wanted to see how humans would handle this situation differently than the Vulcans, and you exploited that curiosity to deploy this. Precisely, Cavell confirmed. And the Xenox are bullies. Bullies only respect a sudden, overwhelming force they cannot comprehend. The other Alliance members fight wars. Humanity, General, ends them. He gestured toward the retreating troop transport. We had to prove 2 things. First, that we explored every diplomatic avenue, ensuring the moral high ground. Second, that our dedication to peace is not born of weakness, but of a terrifying proficiency in violence we choose not to exercise unless forced. Varus bowed his head in a gesture of profound respect, the terrifying logic of the human's existence finally clicking into place. I finally understand, he thought, a shudder running down his spine. It is better for the entire galaxy that humanity plays the role of the peacekeeper. Only a species that has mastered war so completely can afford to decide when not to wage it. It's effective, Cavil continued, his eyes distant. The Cassaba Howitzer is not a war machine, General Varus. It's a baseline, a language simple enough for aggressors to understand. One of the few tools we are willing to demonstrate. As the last human ship lifted off, taking their peacekeeping weapons with them, General Varus stood alone, guardian of his silent, secure colony. He no longer cursed the Council. He finally understood. They had chosen the humans, not despite their peaceful reputation, but because of the cold, primal knowledge that lay buried just beneath it. The humans were the universe's ultimate deterrent, the gentle voice carrying the biggest, oldest, and most terrifying stick.